Elias thought he was doing a great job as a single dad. Since his wife passed away, he kept their home perfectly quiet and very orderly. He worked hard to make sure his 7-year-old son, Julian, didn't have to deal with the sadness of losing a mother. Elias believed that by sticking to a strict routine, he was protecting his son from the pain. One evening, Elias walked past the living room and saw Julian sitting on the floor, holding a photo of his mum. Elias was about to step in, afraid the boy would start crying. But then, he heard something that stopped him. Julian wasn't crying. Instead, he was giving his mum a firm, clear list of instructions on how to change his father's behavior. If you find this story moving and want to hear more tales about family and growth, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel grow, and we appreciate you being part of our community. Elias stood perfectly still, pressed against the wall so Julian wouldn't see him. He expected to hear his son sobbing. Instead, he heard a voice that sounded far wiser than a 7-year-old. "Mum," Julian said, looking at the picture, "Dad is still wearing your old blue apron when he cooks dinner. It has big holes in the pockets. Because he wears it, he gets distracted. Last night, he burned the toast because he was just standing there, looking at the wall. I've tried telling him to use the new one, but he won't listen. He says the blue one is too important. You have to tell him to let it go. We're okay, Mum, but he is making us miserable by holding on to things that don't fit our lives anymore." Elias felt a sharp sting in his chest. He was wearing that old, frayed blue apron. He had worn it every day for over a year. He didn't wear it because it was clean. He wore it because it smelled faintly of Sarah's laundry soap. To him, it was a piece of her. To Julian, it was just a piece of broken cloth that kept his father trapped in a sad reality. He thought he was honoring her, but he was really just turning their living space into a graveyard of memories. Every corner of the house held a reminder: a coffee mug she used, a book she left on the nightstand, a jacket still hanging on the hook by the door. Elias realized he had been worshipping the objects, instead of living for the people who were still here. Elias had spent 58 years believing he understood how the world worked. When his wife died, he tried to treat his life like a balanced account. He thought if he organized the schedule and avoided talking about the tragedy, he would keep his son safe. He was so careful not to let any dust settle on the mantelpiece, yet he let thick layers of dust settle on his own heart. He was an expert at numbers, but he had failed the most important calculation: the value of presence over the value of the past. But he realized he wasn't a tower. He was a cage. He had been so busy protecting his son that he had forced him to live in a house full of ghosts. Julian was a sharp boy who was tired of his father living in the past. "And another thing," Julian continued, "he still keeps your shoes by the door. He polishes them every Sunday. But you aren't coming back to put them on, are you?" "I need him to stop polishing shoes, Mum. I need him to start playing catch with me again. Can you tell him to put them in a box? We need space to walk." Elias felt his knees go weak. He had been so proud of how he handled his grief. He realized now that he wasn't teaching Julian how to remember. He was teaching Julian how to mourn forever. Julian was lonely. He had a father who was physically present but emotionally missing, a man who would stare at a photograph for an hour but couldn't spare 10 minutes to look at his son's school drawings. The guilt washed over Elias like a cold wave, making him realize that he had been starving his son of love while trying to feed his own obsession with the memory of his wife. Elias pushed himself off the wall and walked into the living room, his legs feeling heavy. Julian didn't jump. He just looked up, his eyes meeting his father's. He held the photo firmly. "Julian," Elias said, his voice raspy, "how long have you been waiting for me to take off this apron?" Julian looked at the blue fabric, then back at his father. "Since you burned the lasagna 2 months ago, Dad. I didn't want to hurt your feelings, but you seem so stuck." Elias sat down on the rug across from his son. "I thought I was keeping her close," Elias admitted. "I thought if I didn't touch her things, she wouldn't really be gone. Julian reached out and touched his father's knee. She is gone, Dad. She's in the stars. But you are still here. I am still here. We need to live in the house, not the museum. Elias looked at his son. He saw the way Julian's hair was long, and how he had a smudge of dirt on his chin. He hadn't noticed those little details in months. The realization that he had missed so much of his son's childhood because he was busy looking backward was almost too much to bear. He looked at the room, really seeing it for the first time. It was dark, quiet, and filled with the stale air of regret. It was a space that had forgotten how to welcome the morning sun. "You're right," Elias whispered. He untied the strings of the blue apron. He folded it neatly and set it aside. "I'm sorry, Julian. I've been a bad captain for this ship, haven't I?" Julian gave him a small, rare smile. "You weren't bad, Dad. You were just scared. But you're brave now." Elias let a tear fall. He reached over and took the photo from his son's hands. He realized he didn't want his memory of her to be tied to a dusty pair of shoes or a holy apron. He wanted his memory of her to be tied to the laughter they shared. He wanted to fill the house with the sound of music, the smell of fresh food, and the joy of their shared future. "Let's put the shoes in a box," Elias said. "And let's go buy some new things for the kitchen." Julian laughed, a bright, clear sound. "I know a place that makes great pizza, Dad." Elias smiled. He stood up and held out his hand to his son. Together, they started to pack the shoes away. It was a simple task, but as they worked, they talked. They talked about school, soccer, and even about Sarah. They realized that talking about her wasn't a betrayal of their grief, but a celebration of her life. For the first time since the funeral, the house felt like a home again. The silence was no longer heavy. It was peaceful. They moved through the rooms, clearing out the clutter of the past, making space for new memories to take root. Every item packed away felt like a weight being lifted from their shoulders. Elias realized that the grief hadn't disappeared, but he knew they could move through it together. He had almost missed his chance to be the father his son needed. The fear that had paralyzed him for so long began to melt away, replaced by a quiet, steady resolve to be better. "Thanks for telling me the truth," Elias said softly. Julian shrugged. "That's what family is for, right?" Elias walked to the kitchen window and opened the curtains. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the garden. He realized he hadn't opened these curtains in a year, but the light felt good. It felt like an invitation. It was time to start over. It was time to live. The house was finally a home again, and for Elias, that was enough. It was the beginning of everything they had been missing.